At Thanksgiving, my dad looked my grandparents in the eye and said, "You're not welcome at dinner, my wife doesn't want you there." Hours later, I found myself racing through the cold night to their house, only to freeze when flashing red lights hit me. An ambulance was parked in the driveway. My grandfather had collapsed on the porch, clutching the railing like it was the last thing keeping him alive. When I called my dad, his voice was flat cruel. "He's faking it." I hung up. And what I did next made him and my stepmom panic in ways they never saw coming. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story can reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story touches you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every story here carries pain, truth, and healing, and your support helps me keep sharing them. My name is Jet, and this is the truth of what really happened to my family. The mornings in Asheville had a way of feeling both alive and lonely. That late autumn sun slid in diagonally across the brick streets outside my apartment, gilding the storefronts and the iron railings along the sidewalk. From the cafe across the way, I could hear the whir of a grinder and the muted chords of an acoustic guitar. That was my routine laptop, propped up on a reclaimed wood table, emails pinging in designs half-finished on the screen. I loved the freedom of working as a graphic designer on my own terms. Still, when the cafe emptied, and I found myself staring at the shapes I'd drawn on the screen posters for an upcoming River Arts District exhibit, I felt the silence pressing in. My apartment was neat, almost too neat. Every sketchbook stacked by size, every plant watered just enough. Order was easy. Belonging was harder. The phone buzzed with Sabrina's text, my stepmother's perfect diction preserved even in grocery lists and party memos, a reminder for Thanksgiving at Boone. She had attached a menu: roasted duck with cranberry glaze, imported cheeses, seasonal florals, in muted tones. My grandparents' pumpkin pie wasn't on there. Neither were they. I leaned back and memory carried me somewhere colder, older. Boone, when I was a boy, meant biking up dirt hills, my legs aching, the church bell calling everyone at noon on Sundays. My mother had been gone since I was 10, leaving nothing but a short letter. My father, Cole, had been left behind with me. He hardened beer in hand more often than tools. Words grew shorter, thinner, until whole evenings passed with nothing but the crack of a can opening. Then Sabrina appeared. She walked into our house like she already owned the walls, blonde hair falling just right, smile polished. She'd offered compliments dipped in venom, how resourceful this little place, she had said once before, rearranging the furniture as if it were her stage. Cole let her. He let her rearrange him too. What saved me then, what steadies me now when I think of family, were my grandparents in Brevard. Evelyn with her hands that smelled of nutmeg and cinnamon, Walter with his deep voice telling stories by the fire, his green tie knotted perfectly even if the house was small and the chairs mismatched. Thanksgiving there meant roasted chicken pumpkin pie that cracked a little on top of fire that never died until we were full. I reached for the vase on my counter and slid in a small bouquet of wild daisies I'd picked the day before. They didn't match Sabrina's curated lists, but they looked like Brevard. They looked like home. I would bring them to Boone. Maybe they'd remind everyone of what mattered. I called Evelyn. Her voice came warm, but hesitant. "We'll see how it all goes this year, Jet," she said carefully. When I pressed about plans, she changed the subject to the weather. After we hung up, I sat staring at the green tie folded in my drawer, the one Walter had given me when I was 16. "Wear it when you need courage," he'd said. I wasn't wearing it yet, but the weight of it sat heavy in my mind. I promised myself out loud this year I'd make sure they felt included. I snapped a picture of the daisies, locked the apartment door, and whispered, "This Thanksgiving, I'll bring Brevard back to the table." I didn't know the table had already been locked against them. By the time I pulled into Boone, the house glittered like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Sabrina's touch was everywhere. Chandeliers lit, too brightly, gold-rimmed glassware lined up on tables. candles perfuming the air with orange clove. Jazz hummed from hidden speakers. The lawn outside had been clipped within an inch of its life, and a buffet stretched across the patio, all curated dishes lined in silver trays. I carried the daisies in. Sabrina swept toward me in a sequined dress, smiled as if she'd just remembered my name. "Oh, those are adorable," she said, and without pause handed them to a passing server who disappeared into the kitchen. Not the table, not even a sideboard. Just gone. I scanned the room for something familiar, Evelyn's pie cooling on the counter, Walter's chair near the fire. There was nothing. No pie, no chair. Only people I barely knew talking about lake houses and European vacations. Cole sat in the living room, eyes glued to the football game, beer in hand. "Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" I asked. "Busy," he said flatly, not looking up. I tried to laugh it off to bridge the distance. It's not Thanksgiving without Evelyn's pie. Sabrina floated past, her perfume sharp. "Oh, don't worry. We've got a chocolate soufflé flown in from Charlotte." At the long table, place cards had been arranged with calligraphy. My name was shoved down near the end next to people I'd never met. I sat pushing food around my plate. The turkey was dry, the sauce unfamiliar, and my throat ached with the taste of absence. I tried to steer conversation toward Brevard, asked a cousin if they remembered when Walter used to bring cider jugs to share. They chuckled politely, shifted in their seats. Sabrina cut in, steering the talk, but I talked back to real estate investments. And then, like someone dropping a stone in water, a relative piped up mid-conversation. "Didn't Evelyn stop by the other day with a pumpkin pie?" Shame, but Sabrina said it didn't match the theme. The words landed and hung there. The table went quiet for a beat too long. Sabrina's laugh broke it, high and deliberate. "Oh, you misheard. I only meant it wasn't necessary this year." But I had heard enough. I pulled out my phone under the table, sent a text to Evelyn, "Miss you tonight. Wish you were here." Her reply came back short. "We're fine. Don't worry about us." It sounded nothing like her. Music swelled from the speakers, louder now, guests laughing too hard. My chair pressed against the edge of a secondary table like I was only half welcome. I stared at the daisies I knew were hidden somewhere in the kitchen, unseen, like the people who mattered most. My phone vibrated. On the screen, Grandma Evelyn flashed, then cut off before I could answer. I stood abruptly, heart pounding, and slipped out the front door into the chill night to call her back. The cold cut deeper when I stepped onto the front porch. The music inside still floated out, all brass, in saxophone, but the night smelled of pine and wood smoke. My phone glowed in my hand as I pressed redial. Evelyn answered on the first ring, her voice shaking barely a whisper through tears. "Jet, it's your grandfather," she said. He was waiting on the porch, dressed in his vest and tie, saying they'd call. Then he just collapsed. He's on the ground. They're sending an ambulance. Behind her words, I caught the faint sound of a siren in the distance, the long wail threading the through For enduring there, details sri nadatzis girimata autonomous rivalries exagras. My throat closed. I pushed back into the house, weaving through the laughing guests. Cole sat in the same chair, eyes glued to the screen. Dad said sharply, "Grandpa's collapsed. They're taking him to the hospital." He frowned, as if I'd interrupted something trivial. "He's old Jet. He'll be fine once he rests." Sabrina's hand rested on his arm nails, perfect and polished. "Don't overreact," she said smoothly, eyes cutting toward me. "The elderly faint rat. It's what they do. We don't need drama tonight." The room blurred. The chandelier, the suffocating perfume, the clink of glasses, it all felt grotesque. I grabbed my coat from the rack and fumbled for my keys. From behind me, someone muttered just loud enough. "Maybe it's better they stayed home. It fits the evening more." I froze my jaw tight, then stormed out into the night. The air felt like knives on my face, but it was clean, untainted. I yanked open the car door, my hands shaking so hard, the keys almost slipped. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed again. A message from Hank the neighbor in Brevard. Sabrina called Evelyn yesterday. Told her not to come. Walter dressed up anyway. Been waiting all day. The words burned in my chest. I hit call and put the phone on speaker as I drove. Cole answered, irritation dripping through the line. "You knew," I said, voice low, steering the car down the twisting road, headlights cutting through immense Guthrum. Through the pines. "You knew she told them not to come." "Drop it," he snapped. "Don't blow this up." The line went dead. I clenched the wheel tighter, breath ragged, the radio humming faintly from the dash. The road curved like a ribbon through the mountains, shadows flickering across the windshield. Every mile carried me further from their house of glass and closer to the people who had never turned me away. The green tie sat folded in the glove compartment. I pulled it out at a stoplight, the fabric rough and familiar between my fingers. Walter's words echoed. "Wear it when you need courage." The phone rang again. On the screen, Brevard Hospital. Emergency intake. My stomach dropped as I pressed the accelerator harder, the forest blurring past. The hospital lights were a harsh kind of daylight buzzing overhead, bleaching everything pale. I ran through the automatic doors and found Evelyn in the waiting area. Shoulders hunched, clutching a balled-up handkerchief. Her eyes widened when she saw me, relief breaking through panic. "They've taken him in," she whispered, her hands trembling in mine. A doctor in scrubs passed by, stopping briefly. "He collapsed from low blood pressure. He's got a fractured rib and a head bump from the fall. We're keeping him overnight for observation." I nodded even as my stomach twisted tighter. Evelyn sat down again, tears streaking her face. I reached for my phone and dialed Cole. He picked up after several rings, his words slurred. "He's faking it, Jet. He always says he's tired. He'll be fine." I closed my eyes, the phone slick in my hand. From somewhere near him, Sabrina's voice floated in. "Don't make a spectacle. This is what happens with age." Rage flared so hot, I slammed my fist against the tiled wall. The sound echoed down the corridor. "He's in a hospital bed with wires on his chest. Do either of you even care?" Heads turned. A nurse hurried past, wheeling equipment. Evelyn shrank into her chair, ashamed not of me, but of them. Her silence hurt worse than the phone call. I sat next to her and she fumbled for her phone, finally pressing it into my hand. "Maybe you should see this." Message after message filled the screen. Cole asking for money, sometimes pleading, sometimes demanding. Payments for car repairs, credit card balances, tuition for Sabrina's son, furniture invoices. Each month bled hundreds of dollars. My chest tightened as the truth settled. My grandparents had been quietly bankrolling them for years, scraping away their modest pension to keep Sabrina's world intact. I looked at Evelyn, her eyes brimming with shame. "We didn't want you to worry," she said softly. I couldn't speak. Just then, a nurse leaned closer to Evelyn, speaking kindly but loud enough for me to hear. "I thought you were with family tonight. Your husband kept saying, 'They'll call, they'll want us there.' He was dressed so nicely, waiting." The image cut me open. Walter in his green tie, sitting upright in his chair as if the phone might ring, as if dignity alone could earn him a seat at his son's table. I sank into the chair beside Evelyn, my hands covering my face. The air smelled of antiseptic, sharp and unforgiving. Slowly I let my hands drop, turning to her. "If Dad won't honor you," I said, my voice steady now, "then I will." The weight of those words settled deep, more binding than any vow I'd ever made. And in that moment, beneath the flicker of the fluorescent lights, I knew the time for silence had ended. The hospital at 2 a.m. felt like another world. The hallways stretched long and sterile, every flicker of fluorescent light humming overhead. The only relief, the bitter smell of coffee brewing in a machine that had seen better years. Outside, rain had left the parking lot, slick street lamps shining yellow against the puddles. I'd been pacing for nearly an hour when the glass doors slid open, and Cole stumbled in his shirt-wrinkled tie hanging loose around his neck. The sour scent of alcohol carried even across the hall. Sabrina followed at his side, still dressed in sequins, as though she'd stepped straight from a party, not a hospital. Her lipstick was untouched. Her eyes found mine, sharp as glass. I stepped in front of Walter's room and blocked the doorway. My chest rose and fell with the weight of the night. "You're being dramatic," Cole muttered, brushing past me, but I didn't move. "Dramatic." My voice cracked against the cold tile. "You left the man who raised you alone while he collapsed on his own porch. The man who gave you everything." Cole's eyes hardened, though the liquor dulled their edge. "Parents help their children. That's the way it works. You don't understand." Sabrina slid between us, a faint smile tugging her lips, her words coated in honey but meant to sting. "Evelyn and Walter need to know their place, Jet. We have our own life, our own responsibilities. They can't cling to the past forever." I held up Evelyn's phone screen, glowing with message after message. My voice was steady now. "Is this their place? Paying your bills, covering your loans, taking care of your wife's son while you sit at a football game? Tell me if that's family, because it sure as hell doesn't look like it." Evelyn appeared behind me, her hands twisting her handkerchief, eyes brimming with shame. "Please," she whispered. But the silence in her gaze spoke louder. She was tired of hiding. I set Walter's green tie on the chair beside me. It sat there quietly, as though it had been watching everything unfold, bearing witness when words failed. Cole straightened, his jaw clenched. "You think it's that simple? Do you know what it takes to keep everything going? Bills pile up. Work isn't the same. Parents help their children. That's what they're supposed to do." "They help when there's love behind it," I shot back. "Not when it's demanded. Not when you bleed them dry while pretending you're too busy to show up." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then I made the mistake of naming one of the charges I'd read. $2,000 for your wife's kids' tuition. You couldn't even pay for that yourself. The words hit harder than I expected. Sabrina stiffened, color draining from her face, her hand clamping around Cole's arm. Her mask faltered, and, for the first time, I saw fear flicker across her features. She hadn't wanted that detail to surface. She hadn't wanted anyone outside the three of them to know. At that moment, a nurse walking past paused someone I vaguely remembered from town fairs years ago. She recognized me instantly. "People are talking, Jet," she said gently, almost apologetic. "Everyone in Brevard knows your grandparents were left out tonight. Folks are wondering why you, of all people, haven't stepped in." Her words struck deeper than any argument. It wasn't just us anymore. The whole community had eyes on this. My responsibility wasn't just to Evelyn and Walter, it was to the name I carried, the one my grandfather had built with dignity. I turned back to Cole, voice low, unshaking. "You chose her over them. I'll choose them over you." And with that, I opened the door to Walter's room and stepped inside, leaving them standing in the harsh light of the hallway, silent and exposed. The door shut between us like the final strike of a gavel. Morning in Brevard arrived heavy and gray. Mist curled down the slopes of the Blue Ridge, veiling the tops of the pines. At the little house where Evelyn and Walter had built their lives, the air was thick with liniment and wood smoke, the kitchen table crowded with pill bottles and folded quilts. Evelyn moved slowly, her eyes tired from the night before, but her hands still steady enough to lay a thick brown envelope in front of me. "You need to know," she said, almost as though confessing a sin. Inside were stacks of bills, electric, medical, home repairs, and receipts for things that should never have fallen on them. Some were even loans in Cole's name, but the payments had been pulled from Evelyn's account. I sifted through them, my pulse hammering harder with each line of print. Monthly transfers. Thousands of dollars draining from their small pension. I thought of the cracked tiles in their bathroom, the peeling paint on the porch, the patched knees in Walter's old work pants, and all the while, Cole and Sabrina lived in a house that gleamed like a showroom. A knock on the back door startled us. Hank leaned in, hat still wet from the fog. "Morning," he said, then glanced at the papers on the table. "I figured you'd find out sooner or later." I remember last spring, Sabrina bragging about getting that sofa. Said someone else footed the bill. The words slid into place with the bills in my hands. Every shiny piece in their boon house had been bought with Evelyn and Walter's sacrifice. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, a bitter taste rising in my mouth. If I confronted Cole openly, the last strands of family would snap. But staying silent meant letting them keep draining the two people who had never let me down. I was torn between ruin and betrayal, and either way, the weight sat squarely on me. Evelyn pulled out the old desktop computer they kept in the corner, its screen flickering weakly to life. With a few clicks, she opened their bank portal. Lines of withdrawals, transfers, checks with Cole's name. Each one was a wound, each one a scar across their trust. One document caught my eye and sent a chill through me. My own name. Cole had listed me as a co-signer on a loan I had never seen, never signed, never agreed to. The numbers next to it could choke the small business I'd built, ruin the independence I'd worked years to carve out. My fists curled tight. The phone on the table buzzed. Tessa's name lit the screen. I answered, my voice raw. "Jet," she said, not wasting a second, "your family's all over the community forums. People are furious. Everyone knows about your grandparents being shut out of Thanksgiving. It's spreading fast. If you don't say something, they'll decide the story for you." The kitchen felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. Not only had Cole and Sabrina stolen from Evelyn and Walter, they had dragged my name into their mess. And now, the whole town was watching. I shoved the papers back into the envelope, my jaw set. I had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to be quiet enough not to draw fire. But they had taken money, dignity, and now, even my name. I stood and looked at Evelyn, who stared at me with weary eyes, but the faintest trace of hope. "If Dad thinks he can use me as a shield," I said, gripping the envelope tight, "then I'll turn it into a mirror. And he's not going to like what he sees." The Saturday air in Brevard carried the smell of fresh bread, roasted peanuts, and the sweet tang of strawberries simmering in jars. Fiddles and banjos filled the marketplace as families strolled past stalls, baskets in hand. It was the kind of scene that should have felt warm and simple. Instead, every step I took felt heavy, weighted by whispers that seemed to follow Evelyn and me through the rows of produce and crafts. She moved slowly beside me, a box of jars balanced carefully in her hands. Her fingers trembled with each motion, yet she refused to let me carry them all. "People expect me here," she said, forcing a smile. Her jars of strawberry preserves glistened in the morning light, a small symbol of her persistence. But the moment we set up, questions began to circle. Neighbors asked gently at first, then less gently. "We heard you weren't invited to dinner. Is it true?" Evelyn's face burned as she kept her eyes down, busying herself with arranging jars that were already lined perfectly. Then the crowd shifted. Cole and Sabrina appeared, dressed sharply as though they had stepped out of a magazine spread. He wore a pressed blazer. She wore pearls and heels far too fine for the gravel of the market square. Their timing was no accident. They wanted to be seen, to prove they cared. I stepped forward before they could reach Evelyn. "Not here," I told them, but by then people had already noticed. The low hum of bluegrass was drowned by murmurs. "That's their son," someone whispered. "Those are the ones who left them." Cole lifted his chin, speaking louder than necessary. "Everyone has it wrong. My parents stayed home by choice. They needed rest." Sabrina slipped in smoothly, her voice polished. "We worried about their health. We didn't want them straining themselves for one dinner. People love to gossip, but we're only looking out for them." I pulled the envelope from under my arm and raised it high enough for everyone to see. "Looking out for them." My voice cut through the air. "Is that what you call draining their accounts, piling your debts on them, and leaving them to cover for your life while you toast champagne and boon?" The crowd went still. Evelyn froze, clutching the edge of the table for balance. Cole's face tightened. Before he could respond, a woman stepped out from the line of shoppers. Her voice was loud, indignant. "I saw Walter hand you cash at the bank last month, Cole. Don't you stand here and pretend you're innocent." The market erupted. Dozens of voices buzzed at once, anger and disbelief were over in that too. Tanner. Cole's face flushed red. He gripped Sabrina's arm. Sabrina broke. Her poise slipped, her tone sharp and bitter. "We've sacrificed more than anyone knows. We've ruined our own reputation for them. The least they could do is show some gratitude." Phones came out instantly. Screens flashed. People recorded every word, the outrage already taking shape beyond that square. I looked around at the faces, neighbors, old classmates, families who had known Walter and Evelyn for decades. Their eyes weren't on Cole. They were on me, waiting. I set the envelope down on the table beside Evelyn's jars of strawberry jam. "If my father and his wife can't remember what family means," I said, my voice steady, carrying above the noise, "then I'll start from scratch. I'll build it myself." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was strong enough to make Cole's jaw clench and Sabrina's lips press white. The next morning, the hospital was bathed in sunlight. The windows glowed with gold, and the once shadowed corridors felt softer, warmer, as though the building itself had decided to welcome Walter back to the living. He was being prepared for discharge, his bag packed at the foot of the bed. Evelyn sat nearby, relief and exhaustion lining her face. I had already been there for hours. Paperwork spread across my lap, the ink still drying on documents Evelyn had signed earlier. It was time to do what should have been done years ago. The elevator chimed, and Cole and Sabrina appeared once more, this time with arms full of gifts. A bouquet of roses, a bottle of imported wine, as though extravagance could erase the memory of abandonment. Cole smiled stiffly, Sabrina hovering with practiced grace. I stepped into the hallway, intercepting them before they reached the room. "You can put those down," I said. "They won't fix what you broke." Cole's brows knit together. "We're here to make peace." I handed him a folder instead. Inside, sheets of transactions lay in neat, damning order. "It's over. Every automatic withdrawal, every transfer canceled. You won't take another cent from them." Sabrina's face contorted. "You have no right," she hissed, clutching her bouquet like a weapon. "I do," I replied calmly. "Because this morning they signed everything over to me. I have the authority now. Not you." The flowers and wine sagged in their hands, heavy with futility. Cole's composure cracked. His voice rose, desperate, furious. "You're tearing this family apart. Everything I've done for us." "No," I said, my voice sharp, each word cutting clean. "Family isn't a bank account. It isn't a burden to be passed around. You chose a table filled with greed. I'm choosing the one filled with love." Sabrina threw the bouquet onto a chair, the petals scattering across the floor, forgotten. Before Cole could speak again, the door at the end of the hall opened. Tessa walked in with 3 others from town. She carried a stack of printed pages, screenshots from the forum threads of comments, each one condemning Cole and Sabrina. She handed them to me without a word. I spread them open for Cole to see. Hundreds of voices, names he recognized, all demanding accountability. The fight drained from his shoulders. Sabrina stepped back, her eyes darting to the exit. And then from behind me, Walter's voice broke the silence. Weak, but steady. He leaned on his cane, one hand braced against the wall. His eyes met Cole's, and for the first time all night there was no kindness left in them. "I didn't pretend to be sick," Walter said slowly. "I pretended to believe my son still had love left in him." The words landed heavier than any evidence I could provide. Cole flinched as though struck, Sabrina's face pale. The hallway stilled, witnesses holding their breath. I turned, placing myself beside Walter, steadying him on his cane. My voice was quiet, final. "You lost your chance. From here on, I'll protect them." Behind me, Cole and Sabrina stood frozen, the roses wilting in the corner, the wine untouched. Around us, sunlight poured through the windows, carrying us forward while leaving them behind. The small white church on the hill in Boone glowed under the clear November sun, its steeple sharp against the blue sky. The yard was alive with voices and the scent of roasted chicken, pumpkin pie, and cornbread. Long tables stretched beneath the oaks, crowded with platters people had carried from their homes. This was the community's way of answering what had happened the week before, a late Thanksgiving for Walter and Evelyn, a declaration that they belonged here, not forgotten. I walked between them, Evelyn's arm hooked through mine, Walter steady on his cane. For the first time in days, the weight lifted from their faces. Neighbors clasped their hands, pressing jars of jam loaves, of bread bowls, of sweet potatoes into their palms. I felt a current of quiet defiance in every offering, an unspoken message: you are ours, and we will not let you be diminished. Tessa arrived with a folded newspaper from Asheville, handing it to me discreetly. It's everywhere, she whispered. On the front page, the story of the grandparents left behind an image of Evelyn's jars lined on a table at the market. The tone was sympathetic, and the comments printed beneath were full of outrage at Cole and Sabrina. My chest tightened, not from shame, but from a sense that justice had begun to take shape. The murmur of voices changed as Cole and Sabrina appeared at the edge of the crowd. The maried, an ornate gift basket filled with imported cheeses and wine, as though money might still buy back what they had lost. Their faces wore strained smiles, but the hush that fell told me the crowd was not fooled. Cole approached. First, his voice breaking through the silence. "Son," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "you've taken this too far. I'm still your father. That deserves respect." I faced him fully. A father protects his family. A father doesn't drain them dry and leave them behind. Respect is earned, not demanded. Sabrina's veneer cracked, her voice rose sharp. "You've poisoned this town against us, Jet. You've turned gossip into weapons to humiliate us." I opened the folder I carried, raising my voice so all could hear. "This isn't gossip. Evelyn and Walter have signed over full authority of their accounts to me. From today forward, they will not pay another bill that isn't their own. They will not cover another debt. The support ends here." The crowd erupted into applause, hands clapping against the late autumn air. Cole's face drained of color, his mouth tightening with disbelief. And then a voice from the crowd shouted, "Play it." A man held up his phone, projecting sound through a small speaker. Sabrina's words from the market rang out clear. "We've sacrificed our reputation for them. The least they could do is show gratitude." Gasps, groans, mutters filled the yard. All at once, every mask shattered. Sabrina stood frozen pale as paper. Cole's head bowed as though the weight of the town pressed down on him. The applause rose again, this time not just for the revelation, but for the finality of it. I turned to the table, lifted a glass of cider, and waited until the noise ebbed into stillness. "Family isn't about grand dinners or appearances," I said, looking to Evelyn and Walter. "It's about never leaving each other behind. That's what we celebrate today." Voices rose in agreement, glasses lifted around us, the sound swelling like a tide. The curtain had fallen on Cole and Sabrina. What remained was ours. By the time spring came to Brevard, the hills were green again, dogwoods blooming white against the slopes. I'd left Asheville for good, trading my apartment for a small wooden house just down the road from Evelyn and Walter. A white fence wrapped the yard where rows of lettuce and beans sprouted in neat lines and wild daisies bloomed along the border. Inside, sunlight streamed through wide windows onto the drafting table where I sketched for my design studio. It was small, but it was mine. Built on work with local artisans and businesses that welcomed me like family. The rhythm of Brevard had become my own. Each morning, Walter walked the garden in his old suit jacket, the same green tie knotted at his throat. He leaned on his cane with one hand and sprinkled water from a dented tin can with the other, determined to tend to the earth as long as he could stand. Evelyn baked bread and pies, filling the kitchen with scents that drew neighbors to stop by, unannounced. Their house was no longer heavy with silence. Laughter returned to it like birds returning after winter. At the Saturday market, I set up beside Lila's stand of strawberry preserves. She teased me for arranging my table too neatly, and I teased her for undercharging regulars. Over time, our banter grew into something steadier, an understanding that felt both surprising and inevitable. She was there when Walter first tried to plant tomatoes again, when Evelyn finally allowed herself to sit at the head of the table. She was there when I allowed myself to believe in more than survival. Tessa visited often, bringing news from Asheville. One afternoon, she leaned on the porch railing, watching Walter coax seedlings into the soil. "You know," she said, "you've become the keeper of tradition here. People look to you now." I glanced at Evelyn through the window, her hands busy with a loaf of pumpkin bread. "Tradition," I said, quietly, "was never about wealth. It was about not letting go of each other." By early summer, the garden was lush and the daisies spread across the fence line. We held a wedding in the yard, just me and Lila, Evelyn, and Walter at our side neighbors, filling the lawn with laughter. There was no orchestra, no glittering hall, no Cole or Sabrina. They had left town quietly months before, stripped of money, of status, of the audience they had once demanded. We served pumpkin pie at the table, Evelyn's pride placed in the center. Wild daisies were set in jars along the fence. As dusk fell, I lit a single candle on the table, its glow catching the petals, throwing soft light against faces I trusted. Later, by the fire inside, I sat with Walter and Evelyn, the candle still flickering on the kitchen table. "Family," I said, my voice low, "is the place you're seen without pretending. Where you're held without asking." They nodded, their hands covering mine. The flame bent in the draft and straightened again, steady as if to mark the beginning of something new. And I knew then that the cycle had turned, that what was broken had been rebuilt, and what was lost had given way to a home stronger than anything before. What happened that night changed everything. I thought I knew about family. It hurt more than I can put into words, but telling this story here reminds me I'm not carrying it alone. If you've ever felt overlooked, betrayed, or silenced by the people who should have loved you most, then maybe my story can be a mirror for your own. That's why I keep sharing, because no one deserves to go through this kind of pain in silence. If this touched you, please subscribe and stay with me here. Every time you join, it feels like one more voice saying, "I hear you, I believe you." And that means more than you'll ever know.